The spring of 1940 burst forth not with the gentle promise of renewal, but with the thunderous roar of Panzer divisions. For months, the phony war had lulled the Allied High Command into a perilous complacency, a belief that the Maginot Line and the natural barrier of the Ardennes forest would hold. They were wrong. On May 10th, Germany launched Fallgelb, a plan so audacious it bordered on madness, yet executed with a terrifying precision that would forever redefine warfare. Instead of directly assaulting the fortified French border, General Erich von Manstein's audacious sickle cut, a swift thrust through the supposedly impassable Ardennes, caught the Allies utterly flat-footed. The dense forests, deemed impenetrable to tanks, were traversed with astonishing speed by General Heinz Guderian's the 19th Panzer Corps and General Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, spearheaded by the relentless advance of motorized infantry and engineers. The panzers, still behemoths bristling with cannons, shattered the illusion of static warfare. They didn't stop to consolidate, didn't wait for infantry support. They surged forward, creating deep penetrations, bypassing strong points, and sowing panic in their wake. Their advance was a blur of dust, smoke, and relentless aggression, supported by the terrifying dive bombers of the Luftwaffe, whose sirens screamed like banshees, tearing apart the morale of retreating troops and civilians alike. On the Allied side, the initial response was confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a creeping terror. The best of the British Expeditionary Force BEF and the French First Army, along with the Belgian Army, had pushed north into Belgium to meet what they anticipated would be the main German thrust. A repeat of the Schlieffen Plan, this was precisely what the German High Command wanted. As the panzers tore through Sedan, reaching the Meuse River, and then wheeled northwest towards the English Channel, the trap snapped shut. The Allied forces in Belgium and northern France found themselves severed. From the main French armies to the south, their supply lines cut, their communications fractured. The strategic picture quickly became horrifyingly clear. Over 1 million men, including the entirety of the BEF, were facing encirclement. The swiftness of the German offensive defied all pre-war military doctrine. French tanks, often superior in individual quality to their German counterparts, were used piecemeal, dispersed among infantry formations, unable to counter the concentrated force of the panzer divisions. Allied air support, though valiant, wasn't sufficient to stem the tide of the Luftwaffe's supremacy in the skies over the battlefront. Each day brought news of another town fallen, another river crossed, another division scattered. The British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, newly in office, grasped the enormity of the crisis, but the wheels of counteraction turned too slowly, hampered by shattered command structures and a fundamental misunderstanding of the enemy's operational tempo. The German High Command, particularly General Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of Army Group A, marveled at the speed of their own success, yet also felt a growing unease. Guderian's panzers were pushing so far, so fast, that their flanks were exposed, creating a theoretical vulnerability. But the reality on the ground was that the Allied forces were too disorganized, too stunned, to exploit such weaknesses. The drive to the sea was relentless. On May 20th, Guderian's tanks reached Abbeville on the Somme estuary, effectively cutting off the Allied armies from the rest of France. The coastal towns of Boulogne and Calais, vital port cities, fell rapidly, though not without fierce resistance from their small, beleaguered garrisons. The remaining Allied forces, comprising remnants of the French First Army, the Belgian Army, and the entire BEF, were now squeezed into a shrinking pocket, their backs to the English Channel. Their only remaining port of any significance was Dunkirk. The strategic brilliance of the German plan, executed with such brutal efficiency, had created a catastrophic tactical situation for the Allies. What had started as a confident advance into Belgium had transformed into a desperate fight for survival, a race against time and the relentless German war machine. The sands of Dunkirk, largely unknown to the world just days before, were about to become the crucible of a desperate gamble, a testament to human endurance, and a pivotal moment in the unfolding tragedy of World War II. The question of whether this encirclement would lead to a decisive German victory or a remarkable Allied escape would soon be answered, shaped by a series of fateful decisions on both sides of the rapidly closing front. With the German panzers having reached the coast, the fate of the Allied armies in the north was sealed. The once proud formations of the BEF, the French First Army, and the Belgian Army, now a heterogeneous mix of units, found themselves compressed into a perilous pocket stretching from Arras to Nieuport. The initial shock of the Blitzkrieg had given way to a desperate, fighting retreat. Every road, every village, every field became a battleground as exhausted. Demoralized soldiers fought rearguard actions against an enemy that seemed to possess limitless momentum. The air was thick with the dust of shattered roads and an acrid smell of burning vehicles. Communications were chaotic, orders were often outdated by the time they reached units, and the coordination between British, French, and Belgian commands was tenuous at best. General Lord Gort, commander of the BEF, found himself in an unenviable position. His primary objective, as per directives from London, was to preserve the BEF. But this could not be achieved without the cooperation of his French and Belgian allies. The French, under General Maxime Weygand, initially proposed a counterattack southwards to link up with the main French forces, while the encircled armies pushed north. This Weygand plan was a brave, perhaps desperate, concept, but it was doomed from the start. The Allied forces were too depleted, too disorganized, and too thoroughly outmaneuvered to mount such a complex offensive. Supplies were dwindling, morale was fragile, and the German grip was tightening. Gort, facing the reality on the ground, made the pragmatic, if agonizing, decision to withdraw towards the coast. He would sacrifice equipment if necessary, but he would save his men. This decision, made largely independently, would prove to be a lifeline. The Belgian army, under King Leopold III, had been fighting valiantly on the eastern flank of the pocket. Their resistance, however, was crumbling. On May 28th, King Leopold, believing his country was overrun and further resistance futile, made the controversial decision to surrender. This exposed the entire eastern flank of the shrinking Allied perimeter, forcing the BEF and the French First Army to stretch their already thin lines to cover the breach. The news of the Belgian surrender, when it filtered through, was a devastating blow to Allied morale, compounding the sense of abandonment and isolation. Yet, amidst this despair, acts of incredible bravery and sacrifice were commonplace. The French First Army, specifically the divisions around Lille, fought a series of desperate holding actions, buying precious time for the BEF to reach the coast. Their stand, though ultimately futile in saving themselves from capture, was instrumental in creating the conditions necessary for the evacuation. These soldiers, many of whom would become prisoners of war, knew they were sacrificing themselves for their allies, a testament to a fleeting, shared purpose amidst the chaos of defeat. As the perimeter contracted, the destination became clear. Dunkirk, the port city, with its beaches and shallow waters, was the only remaining viable point for a large-scale evacuation. But even Dunkirk was not an ideal port. Its harbor facilities were vulnerable to air attack, and its shallow waters meant larger vessels couldn't approach the beaches directly. The situation was dire. On the German side, the mood was one of triumph and anticipation. The encirclement was complete. The Allied armies were trapped, their destruction seemingly inevitable. Commanders like Guderian and Rommel, their panzers having reached the Channel, were eager to press home their advantage, to deliver the final, crushing blow. The sheer speed of their campaign had exceeded all expectations. They had achieved in days what had taken weeks in previous wars. The tactical analysis pointed to a decisive victory. The British and French, with their backs to the sea, had nowhere left to run. The Luftwaffe was pounding the shrinking pocket, strafing roads packed with retreating soldiers and refugees, bombing what little infrastructure remained. The German High Command, observing this unfolding catastrophe for the Allies, began to consider the next phase of their campaign, the final push into the heart of France. The destruction of the BEF and a significant portion of the French army would leave France critically vulnerable. The question was not if the Allied forces would be annihilated, but asterisk when asterisk and asterisk how asterisk. The scene was set for a final, decisive engagement, or so it seemed. The exhausted, mud-caked soldiers trudging towards Dunkirk knew only one thing: survival. They clung to the hope, however faint, that somehow, someway, they could escape the tightening noose. The beaches of Dunkirk, a mere stretch of sand and sea, represented both their last stand and their only hope. The strategic implications of this encirclement were monumental. Had the German forces been allowed to finish off the trapped armies, it would have been a catastrophic blow to Allied manpower, potentially crippling Britain's ability to continue the war, and certainly leading to a much swifter collapse of France. The stage was thus perfectly prepared for a climactic German victory, a final act in the swift, brutal drama of the Battle of France. But war, as history often reminds us, is rarely predictable, and even the most meticulously planned campaigns can be derailed by unforeseen events, or indeed, by an order from the very top. The Panzer divisions, having spearheaded the lightning advance to the Channel, now stood poised at the gates of Dunkirk. Their guns could almost taste the salt spray of the English Channel. The destruction of the encircled Allied forces seemed a mere formality, a coup de grace awaiting execution. Yet, on May 24, 1940, an order emanated from the Führer's headquarters that would baffle his generals, confound military historians for decades, and ultimately alter the course of World War II. The Panzers were to halt. The Halt Order was not a momentary pause, but a directive that lasted for 3 crucial days, from the evening of May 24th to the morning of May 27th. During this period, the very forces capable of delivering the final blow to the trapped British and French armies were forbidden to advance into the Dunkirk perimeter. The strategic implications were immediate and profound. General Guderian, known for his aggressive drive, was furious. His corps, having reached the Aa Canal, was within striking distance of Dunkirk itself. General Rommel echoed this frustration. Both commanders saw the enemy on the ropes, ripe for the taking. To stop now, they felt, was to let victory slip through their fingers. The reasons behind Hitler's controversial decision are still debated. A complex tapestry of military considerations, political calculations, and the Führer's unique blend of strategic genius and tactical blunders. One primary military rationale, championed by General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of Army Group A, was the preservation of the Panzer divisions. The tanks had been operating at an incredible tempo, covering vast distances, and their maintenance needs were mounting. Their crews were exhausted. Furthermore, the terrain around Dunkirk was not ideal for tank warfare. The area was crisscrossed with canals, ditches, and marshy ground, making it difficult for tanks to maneuver off-road. A frontal assault on a determined rear guard in such conditions risked bogging down the precious armor, perhaps even leading to significant losses that Hitler wished to avoid for the upcoming Case Red. The final assault on France south of the Somme, another, more political, factor was the influence of Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe. Göring, ever eager to demonstrate the supremacy of his air force, assured Hitler that the Luftwaffe alone could finish off the trapped Allied forces. He claimed his planes could turn the Dunkirk pocket into a slaughterhouse, rendering a ground assault by the Panzers unnecessary. Hitler, who had a strong belief in air power and perhaps wished to give Göring a prominent role in the victory, was swayed by this argument. This decision, however, underestimated both the resilience of the Allied rear guard and the limitations of air power against dispersed targets on a beach. A more speculative, yet persistent, theory suggests a political motive, that Hitler hoped to preserve the British Army, to facilitate a peace treaty with Britain. He may have believed that allowing the BEF to escape, albeit stripped of its equipment, would be seen as an act of goodwill, opening the door for negotiations. This theory, while difficult to prove definitively, aligns with Hitler's sometimes contradictory political objectives. He admired the British Empire and may have seen them as a potential future ally against Bolshevism, rather than an intractable enemy. Regardless of the precise blend of reasons, the impact of the Halt Order was immediate and devastating for the German war effort. In the long run, for 3 precious days, the trapped Allied soldiers, under relentless air attack but largely unmolested by ground forces, were given a reprieve. This window of opportunity, a gift from their enemy, was seized upon with desperate urgency by the Royal Navy and the improvised flotilla of civilian vessels. The beaches, which had been a death trap, became a gateway to salvation. The psychological dimension of the Halt Order was significant. For the German High Command, it sowed seeds of doubt and frustration, creating tension between the Führer and his most successful generals. For the Allied soldiers, it was a moment of bewildering grace, a chance to breathe, to regroup, to fight for survival rather than face certain annihilation. The strategic implications were enormous. The BEF, the core of Britain's fighting force, was spared, while almost all their heavy equipment was abandoned. The trained manpower, the soldiers themselves, were saved to fight another day. This preserved the backbone of the British Army, allowing Britain to continue the war and eventually serve as a vital springboard for the liberation of Europe. The Halt Order at Dunkirk remains one of the most contentious decisions of World War II. Was it a calculated strategic pause, a cautious move to preserve precious armor for the next phase? Or was it a catastrophic miscalculation, born of hubris and a fundamental misunderstanding of the enemy's resolve, that ultimately allowed Britain to survive and prolong the war? The sands of Dunkirk, momentarily quieted by Hitler's command, would soon be churned by the desperate scramble for freedom, a scramble made possible by this single, enigmatic order. The 3-day halt of the German panzers, incomprehensible to many, was a godsend to the beleaguered Allied forces. It bought time, a precious commodity in the maelstrom of war, allowing the British to launch Operation Dynamo. This was not a meticulously planned assault, but a desperate, improvised evacuation, a scramble against the clock and the relentless German Luftwaffe. The sheer scale of the undertaking was staggering, to rescue over 300,000 men from the beaches and harbor of Dunkirk, under constant enemy fire, across a treacherous stretch of the English Channel. The beaches of Dunkirk were a scene of organized chaos, a surreal panorama of human desperation and resilience. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers, British and French, stood shoulder to shoulder, stretching for miles along the shoreline, gazing eastward across the gray, turbulent waters of the Channel. They were exhausted, hungry, and terrified, but a spark of hope had been ignited by the sight of distant ships. Above them, the sky was a canvas for deadly aerial duels. The Luftwaffe, fulfilling Göring's promise, launched wave after wave of bombers and fighters, targeting the crowded beaches, the harbor, and the evacuation ships. The Royal Air Force, often outnumbered, fought ferociously to provide air cover, engaging in dogfights that filled the air with the crackle of machine guns and the contrails of desperate maneuvers. Their sacrifice, though often unseen by the men on the ground, was vital, preventing an even greater catastrophe. The Royal Navy, under Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay, orchestrated the maritime effort with remarkable efficiency and courage. Destroyers, minesweepers, troop transports, and merchant ships converged on Dunkirk, braving bombs, mines, and U-boat attacks. But the shallow waters of the beaches presented a formidable challenge. Larger ships couldn't get close enough to the shore, forcing soldiers to wade out for hundreds of yards, often up to their necks, under fire, to reach smaller boats. This is where the little ships entered history. Fishing boats, pleasure yachts, paddle steamers, lifeboats, tugs, barges, hundreds of civilian vessels, requisitioned or volunteered, crossed the Channel, manned by an eclectic mix of naval reservists, civilian volunteers, and their owners. These humble craft, often dangerously overloaded, ferried men from the beaches to the waiting destroyers further out at sea. Their bravery was legendary, a symbol of national unity and defiance. The logistical nightmare was immense. There were no proper piers on the beaches, so improvised jetties were constructed from abandoned vehicles, and 2 long moles, the east and west moles of Dunkirk harbor, became crucial arteries for evacuation despite being heavily bombed. Soldiers queued for hours, sometimes days, under constant bombardment, their discipline remarkable in the face of such adversity. The French rear guard, particularly the French First Army, played a heroic and crucial role in holding the perimeter around Dunkirk. These soldiers, many of whom had fought continuously since the German breakthrough, knew they were sacrificing themselves to buy time for their British allies and fellow Frenchmen. Their fierce resistance against overwhelming German ground forces delayed the final collapse of the pocket, allowing hundreds of thousands more to escape. Their stand, though often overshadowed by the narrative of the miracle, was a vital component of its success. The human experience on the beaches was one of stark contrasts. Moments of terror, as bombs exploded nearby, sending plumes of sand and body parts into the air, were interspersed with moments of quiet camaraderie, shared cigarettes, and whispered prayers. The sight of the Stukas diving, their sirens wailing, became etched into the memories of those who survived. Yet, through it all, a sense of grim determination prevailed. Each man saved was a small victory against overwhelming odds. The evacuation was not without immense losses. Scores of ships were sunk, thousands of men died on the beaches, in the water, or aboard vessels that never reached safety. Equipment, tanks, artillery, trucks, ammunition, was abandoned on a scale that would cripple the BEF for months. But the objective, the preservation of trained manpower, was being achieved beyond the wildest hopes. As the days wore on, the numbers climbed, 100,000, 200,000, then over 300,000. The sheer scale of the evacuation was a testament to improvisation, courage, and a touch of fortune. The notoriously fickle English weather played its part, with periods of low cloud and calm seas aiding the operation and hampering the Luftwaffe. The miracle of Dunkirk was not just a military operation. It was a profound psychological event. It demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming defeat, resilience, A collective action could snatch victory from the jaws of annihilation. It was a narrative of survival against all odds, a moment that forged a national spirit in Britain and offered a glimmer of hope. In an otherwise bleak European landscape, the sands had become a stage for an epic struggle, not just for survival, but for the very soul of a nation. As the last ships pulled away from the burning harbor of Dunkirk on June 4th, leaving behind a ruined town in a desolate coastline, the world watched, aghast and amazed. The question of whether this epic escape was a pure miracle or a consequence of a catastrophic German blunder would linger. But for now, the British Expeditionary Force and a substantial portion of their French allies were safe, though stripped of their arms, ready to fight another day. When the last vessel departed Dunkirk on June 4, 1940, the beaches were littered with abandoned equipment, the harbor a smoking ruin, and the air thick with the smell of defeat and despair. Yet, against all military logic, over 338,000 Allied soldiers, approximately 200,000 British and 140,000 French, had been evacuated. They arrived on English shores exhausted, often wounded, but alive. The immediate aftermath was a mix of relief and stark reality. Britain had saved its army, but at a tremendous cost. Almost all the BEF's heavy equipment, 2,472 guns, 63,879 vehicles, 20,548 motorcycles, and some 500,000 tons of stores and ammunition lay abandoned on the beaches of France. The British Army was virtually disarmed, its tanks and artillery left behind. A skeleton force with rifles, but little else. This monumental loss meant months of frantic rearmament and training, a period of extreme vulnerability for the British Isles. For France, the situation was even more dire. While a significant portion of its First Army had been evacuated, the bulk of its forces, already reeling from the Blitzkrieg, faced the full brunt of the German advance south. The Battle of France would continue for another 2 weeks, but without the cohesive fighting strength of the BEF and the substantial losses incurred, the outcome was inevitable. Paris fell on June 14th, and France signed an armistice on June 22nd. Yet, the psychological impact of Dunkirk was profoundly different. In Britain, what should have been a devastating military defeat was transformed into a narrative of heroic escape, a testament to national unity and resolve. Winston Churchill, in his iconic